The ancient Egyptians built the pyramids.
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 Rome wasn't built in a day.
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 The Great Wall of China is very long.
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 Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean.
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 Kings and queens lived in castles.
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 The Greeks invented democracy.
The Greeks invented democracy.
The Greeks invented democracy.
The Greeks invented democracy.
Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa.
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 People used horses for transportation.
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 The Vikings sailed in wooden ships.
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 Soldiers fought with swords and shields.
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 The Romans built many roads.
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 People wrote on papyrus in Egypt.
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 Knights wore heavy armor.
Knights wore heavy armor.
Knights wore heavy armor.
Knights wore heavy armor.
The Maya built stone temples.
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 Marco Polo traveled to China.
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 The Japanese lived in wooden houses.
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 People hunted with bows and arrows.
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 The Aztecs grew corn and beans.
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 Kings wore golden crowns.
Kings wore golden crowns.
Kings wore golden crowns.
Kings wore golden crowns.
People traveled by horse and carriage.
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 The Chinese invented paper.
The Chinese invented paper.
The Chinese invented paper.
The Chinese invented paper.
Farmers used simple tools.
Farmers used simple tools.
Farmers used simple tools.
Farmers used simple tools.
Children played with wooden toys.
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 Pirates sailed the seven seas.
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 The Incas built stone cities.
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 People rode horses to battle.
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 The Romans built large theatres.
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 Merchants traded spices and silk.
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 People wrote with quill pens.
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 The Greeks built marble temples.
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 Monks copied books by hand.
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 People lived in small villages.
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 The Vikings explored new lands.
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 Artists painted on cave walls.
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 People made tools from stone.
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 The Romans used concrete.
The Romans used concrete.
The Romans used concrete.
The Romans used concrete.
Kings ruled their kingdoms.
Kings ruled their kingdoms.
Kings ruled their kingdoms.
Kings ruled their kingdoms.
People traveled by foot.
People traveled by foot.
People traveled by foot.
People traveled by foot.
Soldiers marched in formation.
Soldiers marched in formation.
Soldiers marched in formation.
Soldiers marched in formation.
The Maya studied the stars.
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 People cooked over open fires.
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 The Chinese made porcelain.
The Chinese made porcelain.
The Chinese made porcelain.
The Chinese made porcelain.
Children learned from elders.
Children learned from elders.
Children learned from elders.
Children learned from elders.
People used oil lamps.
People used oil lamps.
People used oil lamps.
People used oil lamps.
Farmers worked in the fields.
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 The Egyptians made mummies.
The Egyptians made mummies.
The Egyptians made mummies.
The Egyptians made mummies.
Women wove cloth by hand.
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 Craftsmen made jewelry from gold.
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 The Romans built aqueducts.
The Romans built aqueducts.
The Romans built aqueducts.
The Romans built aqueducts.
People wrote messages on clay tablets.
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 Merchants traded along the Silk Road.
Merchants traded along the Silk Road.
Merchants traded along the Silk Road.
Merchants traded along the Silk Road.